to introduce our panelists. First, we have Chairwoman Tina Braithwaite. She is joining us from the Gwaiute Paiute tribe, and she has been remarkable in working with Sinaka and AB 924, which we'll be speaking about this evening. We have Dave Vialpando, who I visited some years back. He was very kind in letting me visit his facility. He's the executive director of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency for the San Ysabel Botanical Center. He also has another title for the Gaming Commission. He has 35 years in law enforcement experience that he brings to the table. He's also a published author. Ariel Clark, attorney with ClarkNeubert. ClarkNeubert, farming. She's a founding partner. And we have Max Mikalonis. He's our guest of honor this evening. Bill AB 924 was brought to legislature by Banta, who he previously worked with as a member of the staff. He staffed Prop 215 and has been, MRSA Macursa. He staffed MRSA Macursa and has been instrumental in drafting regulations himself. He's also a legislative advocate and a dear, dear friend. We're so grateful to have you all here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about why we're discussing Native American cannabis. In the regulations as they stand, it is required that tribes renounce sovereignty to be a part of our legal cannabis industry. Now, if you're aware of history in any sense, you might feel a sentiment that that is a disrespectful request, because sovereignty is very important for all of us, and especially tribes. When I first saw this in the regulations, I was very much dismayed. I spoke with everybody here and mentioned that in writing a press release for our panel this evening, I started to look through some of the issues that I've been following for a few years now. Jurisdiction is a major issue in addressing how we will facilitate operations for cannabis with tribes outside of the state regulatory authority, and that's a difficult nuance. There's also Public Law 280, which talks about, again, who manages jurisdiction in terms of federal law, local law, tribal law. They're very complicated issues. But in the very simple context, we're going to present to you this evening that you have a vested interest in supporting Native American cannabis and tribes as being a part of this industry, potentially cultivating, doing lab testing, distribution to our licensed retailers, and there are opportunities for revenue for the state. We're also going to talk about what the possibilities are for legislation, why AB 924 didn't work, and what kind of solutions we can put in place, how we can affect policy to make changes for the future. So with that, I'm going to start just by asking our panelists, if you all would each speak to this point, how do the tribes feel about cannabis industry? Are they ready for cannabis industry? Are there tribes that maybe aren't ready or feel apprehensive? As of right now, cannabis has been a part of tribal industry in Washington since 2015. So California's had some time to look at this. The tribes have had some time to look at this. What has the initial response been, and has that adapted over time? I'll start with Chairwoman Tina Braithwaite.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Tina Braithwaite, and I am the tribal leader of the Benton Paiute tribe. We're 40 miles east of Mammoth Lakes up in the Sierras. And we have the first state recreational dispensary on our tribal lands. We opened 4/20/2017. And since we've opened, we have not had any incidences on our tribal lands at all as far as our dispensary. When we first legalized and passed cannabis on our tribal lands, we have, out of 140 tribal members, we had 5 no's. We were able to educate our people on the positive sides of cannabis, and what it's doing for not just our people, but people across the nation, especially with the opioid crisis. You know, our government, they feed people opioids every day and get them addicted. So I believe that opioids are the entrance drug and cannabis is the exit drug.
Yeah.
I have approximately 15 elders on our reservation. We make a topical with cannabis. Through that topical, it has eliminated a lot of their opioid use. And now I have elders from other reservations that have been asking, you know, they come out to our dispensary, they purchase their products, and they leave. We haven't had no issues with law enforcement. We have our own regulatory body. They regulate us. Sometimes I think they over-regulate us, but we are in a better situation than you all. No offense. California, who would have thought that California would be behind Nevada? When Nevada 10 years ago, you went to jail for 6 months for internal possession, and now here we are. California was supposed to be the leader in cannabis, and they're way behind Nevada. But, you know, hopefully the state will get to where they need to be. You know, we've just, you know, been doing our own thing. We manufacture, we grow, we manufacture, we have extraction, and we send out all of our products for testing to this nice gentleman and his facility. And we make sure that our packaging, we try to mirror the state as close as we can, you know, so that we don't have any issues. And the state, the counties have been real respectful. The states, they haven't been too good to us. You know, they locked us out of the industry. We have no legal pathway. And we're forced to do a nation-to-nation right now. We cannot sell into the California legal market, which is, it's, you know, it's awful because, you know, we have, you know, we support our own people. You know, we're governments, we have, you know, our obligation to our reservations, our people, and, you know, so we're just doing what we need to do, and we're creating our own tribal market. Thank you.
I as well would like to thank you all for the invitation. As Courtney mentioned, I'm Executive Director for the Tribal Cannabis Regulatory Agency for the Ipe Nation of Santa Ysabel. It's a tribe on 15,500 acres, about 980 some odd members in East San Diego County. Little town of Julian, Santa Ysabel, that's where we're at in rural San Diego County. The question was, what's the position of tribes in cannabis? I also serve as Executive Director for the California Native American Cannabis Association. CNACA.us is our website if you'd like to visit. We have 23 member tribes. You know, the myth is that tribes across the country, particularly in California, are rich off of gaming, right? We make a lot of money off of gaming. Well, the tribes that are interested in cannabis primarily are tribes that don't see revenues from gaming. They've been marginalized into rural areas such as Bishop, such as Death Valley for Timber Shoshone, or rural San Diego County as ours is. We don't have gaming. We don't have a casino. We had a casino. I was the chairman of the Gaming Commission up until we closed it in February of 2014. So the myth is that tribes make money off of gaming. That's just not the case for most of the 110 tribes in California. In Senaca, we have 23 member tribes. Only 3 of those tribes are gaming tribes, and they're exploring cannabis, absolutely. It's an economic development opportunity for tribes. But most tribes that are interested in cannabis, like Benton, Paiute, like Santa Ysabel, are not gaming tribes, and we're not making money. We're not making money from a lot of things. So cannabis is an opportunity. For Santa Ysabel, we've been in this business almost 3 years. As soon as the Wilkinson memorandum came out, the tribe took a look at its constitutional process, passed a law, passed an ordinance, created a regulatory agency, and we're now just south of $50 million of non-tribal tenant money invested in developing our facility at Santa Ysabel. We have 9, we call them tenants, 9 enterprises, separate enterprises, non-tribal owned enterprises. 3 of those are manufacturers. 1 is an organic waste processor. 1 is a certified testing lab, and I heard you talking about testing regulations. We predate the state of California in every single area of cannabis regulations, including laboratory testing. So you said there's 1 lab? No, there's 2. The other one's at Santa Ysabel. Now, they can't get state licensed, unfortunately, due to the bureaucracy here in the state and intransigence. But it is testing all the way through the state's level 3 regulations that we adopted over a year ago. We're doing it now. We have an organic waste processor for cannabis waste, and the rest are cultivators. And right now, as we sit, if all that cultivation space were occupied with plants, we'd be looking at a 250,000 plants right now today. So the tribe has a substantial investment in cannabis. We're regulating 24/7. Your Bureau of Cannabis Control, how often are they at your property? We're there 24/7. I have a regulatory staff that's there right now because our facility is 24/7. We have a 24/7 manned surveillance room. Not just the server, the DVR servers, but live people watching everything that's going on. BSIS certified security guards, armed and unarmed. Our pesticide regulations, transportation regulations, laboratory testing regulations, cannabis waste regulations, as I mentioned, predate the state of California. We're very serious about this, as many other tribes in California. The unfortunate thing is when we get to talking about AB 924, the state has thrown up a roadblock to tribal participation in the California cannabis market. And this isn't a government lesson, but let me tell you what sovereignty is to tribes. It's like asking a person to give up their identity. Who you are as a person, who you are as a people. We want you to give that up and defer all of your culture, all of your laws, all of your regulation, all of your government to the state of California. You know, there's 3 political subdivisions mentioned in the Constitution: the feds, the state, and tribes. It says nothing about cities, says nothing about counties, right? We're on par with the state. The state should be negotiating in a respectful government-to-government basis for tribal participation in the cannabis market. So let me explain to you and answer your question how serious tribes are. Tina alluded to it. We're creating a tribe-to-tribe market. What does that mean for you? Well, Santa Ysabel, we already have a handful of tribes very close to us and some far away who want to be the recipients of that manufactured and cultivated product that we're now producing on our reservation. They're going to be selling it. They're going to be selling it to California citizens. Now, Santa Ysabel, as I mentioned, we have a very robust regulatory framework. But imagine that there's a tribe out there that says, you know what? Who needs regulations? We can do anything we want on our reservation. No pesticide testing, no laboratory testing, no childproofing, no ingredient levels. Hell, customers come to our reservation, we'll sell you whatever you want. So what the state of California has created by keeping tribes out of this market is a tribe-to-tribe market with some robust regulation like Benton, Paiute, or Santa Ysabel, and possibly less than robust regulation that actually puts California citizens at risk, those consumers at risks. That's what the state of California has created. Tribes aren't going to walk away from this market. We're in it too far. There's too much money involved. So there will be a tribe-to-tribe market. No, by the way, none of the revenues generated from those transactions go to the state of California. We don't participate in that. All of that money comes to the tribe, and tell me that we aren't going to be able to offer our product a whole lot cheaper than anyone else in the state of California. So we're pretty serious about cannabis.
All right, Dave, you covered a lot of topics here. One, testing. Chairwoman Braithwaite and I discussed that with lab testing, we now have a blockade where in order to be testing with a licensed facility in the state of California, you need to be a licensed entity. So there's some complications there. Obviously, they found a solution by testing at Santa Ysabel Botanical Center. You also touched on how you're approaching this in respect to the ability to distribute to the state market. So now we have an institution where the tribes are working together, and what does that mean for the greater enterprise that we have within the state of California? If you are not complying with regulations, you're creating your own regulations. There's something to be noted in the fact that historically the federal government questioned whether or not tribes could govern themselves, and the gaming tribes showed that that was definitely possible. And the Santa Ysabel Botanical Center has shown itself to be regulating beyond what the state requires. In one instance, Dave and I discussed that there was a dispensary in San Diego, a state licensed dispensary, and one of the inspectors came in and said, every product on this shelf is failed compliance, except for this one. And it came from Santa Ysabel Botanical Center. So the tribes are showing that not only can they meet the needs, but they can also regulate beyond what is required for the state. We also should address how we are approaching this in terms of the money that you mentioned. So in Washington, for example, this is going back to sovereign nations creating a compact. In Washington, the state government and the tribes came to an agreement, and they said, okay, we don't necessarily want people going to the tribe and getting, or the reservation and getting a deal, because we're concerned about how that's going to affect the state market. So they came to an agreement and they said, okay, everybody's going to charge a tax. The state will charge this amount and the tribes will charge on par, but the money that the tribes charge will go back to the tribes. And then they're able to use that money to support economic development, which is one of the reasons that we're talking about this, because we'd like for the tribes to have that opportunity. So with that money, Chairwoman Braithwaite and I discussed that she had proposed the possibility of a healthcare system for the tribes, where the descendants would have access to that healthcare system, and in addition, it would release a burden on the state. And here in California, we have what some would call a welfare state. So any opportunity to diminish that burden would be welcomed. Chairwoman Braithwaite, could you potentially talk to us about what your challenges were there, what you proposed, and then maybe Max can talk to us about what those issues are surrounding that and why potentially that wasn't an avenue for us to take.
Okay, so in the beginning, when we tried to get that government-to-government consultation with the governor's office and we were refused, we tried to create a program where the tribes would charge a tax equal to the state, and those taxes would go into a pot like the RSTF monies, and they would be used for healthcare. Hospitals in California, there's not one Native American hospital in California. The IHS facilities, that's the Indian Health Services. The federal government claims they have a federal trust responsibility to the tribes for healthcare. Well, we're 400 years from now where we'll see our first Indian Health Services facility health clinic built in California. So we were trying to, in the beginning, create that healthcare system for all Native American people, whether you were enrolled member of California or not. You could be Cherokee, you could be, Sioux, wherever, but if you could show that you were Native American and you lived in California, you could go and be treated at these health facilities for free. Healthcare, hospitals, mental health, substance abuse, aftercare, which really lacks in this country. There's no aftercare. Education, elders programs, youth programs, and we were going to try to create after like not a treatment, but like a halfway house type program for the Native American prisoners that come out of the federal prisons. They could come in, they would be in a transitional house for 90 days, get on their feet, get their birth certificates, their driver's license, get a job. 90 days, they would transition out, into their new, on their feet and on their way, just to try to help, our Native American people. But that got killed in the beginning. The state, there was a lot of kickback from that. Nobody wanted to do it. There was like, who's going to manage that program? You know, there was like, how are we going to do that? You know, and then the state just, you know, it just got pushed to the side. You know, if we could have created that structure, how could the state have said no to us? We would have took a burden off of the state financially, because every Native American in this state would have been eligible, not to mention their descendants. And, you know, because right now, if you're a descendant of a tribe and you're not federally recognized, you don't even qualify for education. You know, you're just, you can apply for grants, but they want you to be a federally recognized Native American. So, you know, we could have helped our own people, you know, created our own healthcare system, but it got kicked out. And, you know, it's really unfortunate that, you know, nobody really thought that that would be a positive thing for, you know, a win-win for the tribes and the state.
If I could just add one thing to what Tina mentioned, just so you understand where tribes are at. Tribes are some of the poorest communities in California with the highest rates of unemployment. One of our counterparts, George Golson, the chairman from Timbisha Shoshone, didn't miss any opportunity at the legislature with meeting with the legislature around AB 924 to explain that our community is so poor that we have to pass the hat just to bury our dead. And you know from gaming there's a thing called per cap. Per cap is where you take the revenues from the tribe, you divide it up by tribal members, and each tribal member gets a check. At San Ysabel, when we structured our statute, we put a prohibition on any per cap payments. Every single dime generated from cannabis by the tribe went to tribal infrastructure and government services, much as Tina mentioned. Even my fines and penalties fund, because we do fine our tenants when they violate the regs, goes to the tribe's general fund that's allocated for drug prevention and youth skill building programs. None of that fine money even comes to the regulatory agency. It goes for tribal infrastructure. Sorry.
I started working on tribal cannabis and worked primarily on tribal cannabis when I was working in the state legislature. I've been lobbying for a year and a half now for K Street Consulting. K Street does have tribal clients, as in casino tribes, as well as we have one tribal cannabis business that's on the San Ysabel territory. And so we have, you know, those angles, but then from going back to the beginning, working on the first tribal cannabis bill, the one remarkable thing was that how divisive the issue was, and how when we had all these different stakeholders, we had the League of Cities, we had the police chiefs, we had the United Food and Commercial Workers and the Teamsters, labor unions, we had CCIA, we had Cal Growers, we had whomever else, and also all the county organizations, the State Association of Counties, the rural counties, urban counties. This issue united everyone else like no other issue, and invariably united them in opposition, because every single other stakeholder saw some way they would lose from allowing this to happen and integrating this into the state marketplace. Fundamentally, the state and federal rules and laws and jurisdictions are different on tribal land, and the non-cannabis specific rules will apply in different fashions. As a brief example, on labor laws, there is currently, I think, federal litigation and stuff that's gone up to the Supreme Court, if I recall, over whether you can go and organize workers on tribal land, or to what degree they'd follow the NLRB process for labor organizing. So it's fundamentally a different creature, and it's fundamentally a different system of governance beyond cannabis. And because of that, it's so incredibly difficult to fit cannabis regulations into a tribal box, or to fit tribal sovereignty into a state cannabis regulations box. And what I appreciate and admire about what the chairman, or what the chairwoman, and what CNACA has done is AB 924 really eliminated and worked with all the opposition I listed before, and bringing all of them, if not, some support, many neutral, and as close to not opposing as they could. And they did a really admirable job crafting that compromise, and yet it still got torn apart, and it still got rejected by the committees, and without really understanding the steps and hard work that had gone into it. I feel it wasn't recognized. The one thing is that next year we have a new governor. We have a new legislature, some legislative changes, but more so we have a new governor, and I am hopeful that the next administration will be willing to engage more actively and thoroughly and early on rectifying this tribal cannabis issue and trying to solve it, and trying to come up with a compromise than the last one did.
So when Ariel Clark started her career, she'd intended to focus her efforts on tribal law. Some attorneys spend their whole lives just completely focused on this one subject because it's quite complicated. And Ariel has been working with the California Native American Cannabis Association. She understands what some of these issues are. She is Native American. Can you speak to us about some of the issues that we're facing in regards to Native American cannabis in the state of California, and what some of the issues are that we should address in creating a pathway forward?
Thank you so much. I've been focusing also on cannabis, and we work with a lot of growers and dispensary operators and lots of people who are in the cannabis industry. And then I also have a background in Indian law, and we work with tribes on developing their tribal cannabis programs. This intersection between tribes in California and cannabis is one that I just want to take a moment to kind of talk about what this looks like. We all know that California is the 5th largest economy in the world. Nearly half of the cannabis market is in California. There are 110 tribes in California, and thousands of acres are within the jurisdiction of California Indian tribes. These tribes have been here since the beginning of time. I talked with an elder, Larry Benegas, who actually passed away a couple of weeks ago, who really was involved in cannabis and healing for Native people. And he told me that cannabis has been used in California amongst the Native people for thousands and thousands of years. So here I am, maybe, I don't know, I started working with cannabis businesses in 2005 and encouraged all of my clients to support regulations and pass a whole series of laws in California so that we could have a regulated cannabis market. And by the way, grow cannabis on land and sell cannabis on land that are I'm from Michigan, my tribe is in Michigan, but that are on these people's lands. And the absolute outrageousness that tribes in California do not have the opportunity to enter into the regulated market and sell into and sell between tribes and the California cannabis, the larger commercial market, is completely outrageous. Other states have figured that out through a compact model. Tribes clearly, listen to what Dave has said, and Chairwoman Braithwaite as well. Tribes can clearly regulate themselves incredibly well. We, and with these two and many other people involved in CNACA's efforts, and other folks kindly went to the state of California and said, look, we will, here's a way that we can work together on this. And that has been rejected. And I have to say, Max, your statements about, this unifying issue, it's really amazing. I saw clients of mine who were California cannabis operators, be deathly afraid of tribes getting into cannabis because they looked at it like tribes will have some sort of edge on the market, or these operators that are on tribal land will have an edge, and that's unfair to me. And I'm looking at this guy and thinking, you care about your stakeholders so much, and you don't understand, or hopefully I can help educate you and help you understand how this will benefit these communities where literally most people are at or below the poverty level. Like, when do we decide that being completely self-interested and money obsessed is something that is like maybe not the move forward globally? You know, and when we've had these opportunities in this state to create laws and rules and regulations and a culture, and this is what's happening, is really abhorrent. So on that happy note, I just want to thank you, Courtney, so much, and Peter so much, and everybody for coming here and paying attention to this issue. I guess I know I'm not really answering the question, but I just, you know, there is still an opportunity to create some sort of change around this, and I fully support tribes having, you know, a little bit F California if people can't get it together, and let the tribes, you will, and excellent, and I am cheering you on, and so are we all, to have a very thriving cannabis market. But let me also say this, for our clients that are cannabis, we represent a lot of legacy cannabis operators in California. And what an opportunity it would be to be able to think about it. There only 15% of cities and counties are giving cannabis licenses. So now I'm talking to you guys who want to have, you know, if you aren't already licensed or you want to expand your footprint in California, to have the opportunity to grow on tribal land. And these folks are, you know, you're within their jurisdiction under their very regulated a tribal cannabis program. There is a massive opportunity when 85% of the cities and counties in California, you guys, don't give a shit about giving cannabis licenses. You have tribes that would be very happy to open those doors, but we need to have an opportunity for those businesses to sell into the regulated market. So, you know, when we think about sort of how do we all win in situations, that is a nice thing to think about. With public safety, yes, with having products that come to California consumers that are tested and well regulated, but also opportunities for business people to potentially work with tribes. And our firm works with a number of tribes and developers and folks who are, anyway, all in the tribal cannabis context. So there's a lot here, so thanks for paying attention.
So I just want to raise a few moments where it might be really lovely to go to the reservation and experience cannabis. Yes, healing is very important. Medicinal opportunities. Native Americans hold sacred the healing medicine of plants. I'm reading a book on Native American plant medicine right now, and it's something we don't all know about because it is sacred. We don't get to hear of all these matters. There's also the opportunity to go to a cannabis resort. There was a team in South Dakota that wanted to put together a resort, and it was shut down by the local government. Here in California, we've had several tribes that tried to create operations and were shut down over the course of the last few years. So we're in a moment now where we're trying to create a space where everybody is on common ground and is happy and finding solutions. Chairwoman Braithwaite would like to speak to this.
So as I said earlier, we're 40 miles east of Mammoth Lakes up by Mammoth Ski Resort, and we are looking at doing a destination resort, cannabis-friendly destination resort where you can come and get a cannabis-infused massage. You can maybe have some cannabis cuisine. Maybe you can have a cup of cannabis coffee with a THC-infused edible. You know, we're just trying to get out there and do, you know, some positive things around cannabis because it's all about education. You know, that stigma of getting high and, you know, it's a gateway drug. You know, those days are gone. We just need to educate the public on the medicinal side and the healing properties of cannabis, CBD, and, you know, I heard your guys' issues about those the festivals and the consumption, well, guess what? We don't have those issues on the reservations. So, you know, if you guys want to do a music festival and consume a little bit of cannabis, by all means, reach out to some of these tribes because I'm sure they'll be open to that.
As an event producer, I will go ahead and say yes. Thank you very much. We're gonna let everybody know when it opens. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so now that we're all on board, we all want to support Native American cannabis. What are the solutions? What can we do now to create a space? We know there were some issues with AB 924. Not everybody could come to a good agreement on that. There were some issues, some education that needed to be happening. Also, we needed more panels like this to shine a light on Native American cannabis and why we want it. What's next? What are our next steps? How can we all come together? How can we convince everyone that this is the avenue, this is the pathway? We can all work together. It's not an infringement on the existing owners and operators within California. It's not an obstacle for those who wish to license their entity. It's an opportunity for all of us to create a beautiful cannabis industry of the future. How do we get there? What are the next steps as of right now? Max, you talked about next year we're going to have a new government in place in regards to legislation. So we have some new players. What do? Do we send you there and say tell them that we want Native American cannabis? What are some of the issues that we can address, and how can we put everybody on the same line of I will say offense?
Well, you can send me there, but it's to be determined what I can actually say. And part of that is something that we haven't talked about as much in this discussion, but which is there is all this industry opposition or law enforcement or local government or all the other stakeholders that weren't cannabis friendly or that weren't tribal cannabis friendly. The other question, though, is how are we getting or working with the larger tribes and the large tribe, smaller tribe interactions there? Because that, you know, my firm represents several larger gaming tribes, and for me to be able to work on this issue requires me to not have a conflict on this issue. It requires me to educate and work with those larger tribes so they recognize and appreciate and respect the work being done and the goals of the smaller tribes that don't have that. I think I'm just... So I think that's part of the big question for me, and with this is the engagement with the larger tribes along with the engagement of the Newsom administration. From some conversations I had with the state licensing authorities, maybe it's too close, but with the state licensing authorities, is that this rule and tribal cannabis came from on high. It was an order from higher levels of government than the state regulators to go and put in their regulations a waiver of sovereign immunity, a pathway to licensure for tribes, which isn't really a pathway because of the waiver and because of the local authorization requirements. But that wasn't their choice. They didn't have statutory explicit authority to do that. And ultimately a new administration can give a new order and can go and change that conversation. And so I think it's about a large tribe strategy, an education strategy, and a Newsom administration strategy. And I'm fairly confident it will be Gavin Newsom and not Republican John Cox because of how democratic California is.
Ariel, would you like to speak to this? Oh no, I think Sinaka, some involvement with Sinaka maybe, right?
Yeah, certainly Sinaka has a seat at the table. We are gearing up at the end of the month to renew our efforts to revive 924 or something like it. For those of you that don't know, Sinaka member tribes, the 23 member tribes that backed 924, gave up a lot. There were a lot of compromises on behalf of the tribes. This woman, late night rants. What the hell are we doing? Yeah, beat up quite a bit. But the design was tribes agreeing to come under the same regulatory framework as the state, as any other entity in the state of California. without having to give up our civil regulatory authority and our tribal sovereignty. So the pathway is convincing folks that a consistent regulatory structure with the California cannabis consumer first and foremost in thought is in everyone's best interests at the end of the day.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Of course.
So when we first started the negotiations with the state, our main goal was to preserve our sovereignty. That was never nothing was going to ever take away our sovereignty, because the way I explain our sovereignty is if the governor of California wanted to waive the rights of every one of you people in the audience, he could not do that without a vote of the people, right? You cannot waive your rights. He could not waive your rights in California to Nevada and say, okay, California residents, you have no rights now because I just waived them to Nevada. That's how sovereignty is with tribes. We are peer jurisdictions to the state. We are not below the state. We are not below the counties or the cities. We are equal to the states. We are our own sovereign nations. So for us to waive sovereign immunity was not even at the table. Tribal leaders cannot just waive our sovereign immunity with a signature. It doesn't work that way. I would be hung by my toes by my people. So that was never an option. So we tried to preserve our sovereign immunity at all costs. We did try to make a deal with the state saying that all sales on reservation, tribes would keep those taxes. Once our product leaves the reservation and goes into the retail market, then those taxes will go to the state. Unlike Washington, where if a product leaves the reservation and if a product is sold on reservation, Washington state keeps those taxes. And once the product leaves the reservation and goes out into the retail market, those taxes go back to the tribes. We were not trying to do that. We were trying to be fair and allow California to also get, their tax money, and the states and the counties will get their tax money, but it never worked that way. We weren't going to set bad precedents by, allowing, the tribes to waive sovereign immunity. And we did not agree to the state coming into our tribal lands and taxing our non-tribal investors and those taxes going back to the state, because those taxes need to stay with the tribes. Anything that happens in our sovereign nations need to stay within our sovereign nations. That's the way it is. We're not setting bad precedents, and yes, I am the villain in all of this, because I said no, we're not doing it. And hopefully the state, we can educate them on tribal sovereignty, that tribes are governments, and that we ourselves have our own people that we need to support, and through insurance and programs, essential programs, substance abuse. We have all our own programs that we need to support, and if we could do those things, we would take a big burden off the state. We would be self-sustaining. The state we wouldn't have to worry about, these poor tribes, we would support ourselves, so that was real important to us to, maintain our integrity, because at the end of the day, when we die, that's all we have is our name and our integrity. And, if we start setting bad precedents in Indian country, what does that say for our future generations? Every decision we make right now as a tribal leader affects our future generations. And if I waive sovereign immunity for cannabis, the next thing I'm going to be waiving sovereign immunity for this, and I'm going to be waiving sovereign immunity for that, and I'm not going to have sovereign immunity, and we won't have a sovereign nation when my future generations, are leading our nations. So that's why we said no.
Here. I think that you're touching on something, and that's that there are matters here that are actually bigger than cannabis. Cannabis is bringing subject matter to our cognition and saying, these are issues that have been here, they've been here for a long time, and cannabis is giving us an opportunity to look at them and speak about them in public and to the government. And it leads me to point out that the climate for Native American cannabis and cannabis in general at the federal level has not been supportive. In December of 2014, we had the Wilkinson memo, and when I read it, I interpreted it to mean that given certain jurisdictional concerns, tribes had sovereignty and they could cultivate cannabis. When I called the governor's office and spoke to their liaison for Native or tribal affairs, I was told that they don't interpret it in that way. So that to me was a little bit of a trigger. I was a little bit taken back by that what seemed so simple to me, and I have studied law. I was a political science major in university. I'm not an attorney. All my best friends are attorneys, but I'm not an attorney. So if I'm interpreting it this way, and it seems very straightforward to me, I'm surprised to hear that the governor's office does not support that as an interpretation. So I don't feel like the climate has been very friendly to cannabis in general, but more so for tribal cannabis. So I would say to anyone that's watching, for all of you that have taken the time to join us here this evening, please do your part to support tribal cannabis and our ability to not only to purchase, but also to distribute, to test, and to find a way for all of us to work together so that we can have a greater industry of tomorrow. We have probably a few minutes to take some Q&A. Before we do, this is a very passionate conversation that we're having. When we talked in private, it would have been much more dramatic. So you're not witnessing that here today. We're really toning it down. But it's a very serious issue for us. We're grateful to have this platform to speak to you all about it. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share before we introduce Q&A about how we can create a legal framework or create a space to bring another bill to the table that succeeds?
So right now there's a bill, and it's a federal bill. It's called the S3032. Senator Elizabeth Warren is authoring this bill, and it's called a States Act. I know a lot of people aren't aware of this, but when the Wilkinson memo was rescinded, it didn't just affect the tribes, it affected everybody across the nation because it's federally illegal everywhere. So what this bill is going to do for not just tribes, but for everybody is if the state has legalized cannabis in their respected states, then the federal government cannot come in and enforce. They cannot enforce, and that language includes tribes. So if that bill gets passed, you know, the big gaming tribes are going to climb down off their fence and they're going to dive into some cannabis because right now everybody's fearing federal enforcement. So if you guys can, you know, see your way to support that bill, it's S3032. Elizabeth Warren is authoring it, and you know, I think it would be a good positive thing if we could get that passed.
I just want to mention that in rescinding the Wilkinson memo, Sessions rescinded the Wilkinson memo and the Cole memo. In doing so, he gave all the district attorneys the opportunity to decide their own priorities for enforcement. So does anyone have anything they could speak to in regards to our own U.S. district attorney and what the climate is there?
So I went up and spoke with the assistant U.S. attorney in Sacramento about 3 months ago. And I was told by him that we are not on his high priority for enforcement list. So, you know, they have a lot of bigger fish to fry out there. They're looking at the bigger cultivators. So tribes aren't really, I mean, we're on their radar. They're watching us. But as long as we do what we told them that we would do, and follow and regulate, self-regulate, we're testing, we're trying to mirror and be respectful of the state, even though they weren't respectful to us. We're still trying to keep that, you know, we're testing, we're packaging, you know, labeling, we're doing everything to mirror the state as close as we can. We promised we wouldn't take our product out of state, you know, so we're being respectful in that way. But, you know, I mean, they're watching. They know what's going on. They know what tribes are doing what. And, you know, as long as, you know, we do what we say we're going to do, because like I said, our word and our integrity, you know, that's everything to us. And, you know, I asked him when, you know, if you decide you want to come down and enforce on my reservation, you don't need to come with your 50 guns and your officers ablazing. Just call me. I'll come back to Sacramento. We'll have lunch. We'll discuss it like adults. And, but don't come down there trying to act badass, because it's just not going to work for us. But yeah, so he was respectful in that way.
You want to talk about enforcement, Dave?
Sure. So the watchwords that we used for our enterprise in Santa Ysabel, collaborative, cautious, and conservative. We started very small, we moved very slowly, and we have an absolute open door policy when it comes to properly credentialed law enforcement, state, local, or federal. I came from law enforcement 35 years. I spent 20 years in the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement, probably targeting it. Anyway, never mind. Won't go there. A lot of the law enforcement folks in Southern California and the Southern District, where we're at in San Diego, I know firsthand. They come up and visit. We've had DEA agents, DA investigators. I just had the sheriff's lieutenant for our local region there 2 days ago, because we're team teaching a class at Pechanga, a gaming class at Pechanga next week. It's just not that big a deal. If you're a tribe and you stay within the envelope that the state has constructed, even though state law doesn't apply on the reservation, we found that if our regulations, if what we allow is consistent with what's allowed in the remainder of the state, we're fine. And so far with our U.S. Attorney, with our DA, with our sheriff and other law enforcement folks, it's just not an issue. We're yesterday's news.
And with that, we can begin our Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for the panel? I have one here in the back, and I'll paraphrase your questions so everybody can hear. Some tribes will span multiple states. So in regards to the question, we might ask, how are you transporting across state lines? How are you potentially
any information
creating distribution channels?
Yeah, that's easy. Easy.
So if your tribe goes into 2 states, like say California and Nevada, you can actually open operations in Nevada and in California. You would have to get a compact through Nevada. The governor has compacted with 27 tribes of Nevada. So the lands in Nevada would fall under the structure of Nevada. And then of course, you could do California, but why would you want to? Because California has no pathway. So, that's how it works. Whatever the state, if it's legal in that part of the state where, part of your land is, then I would, if you were going to do that, I would do the research to see what's the structure, what are the state laws, and, how hard is it, to get either a license or your compact.
With regard to transportation, Santa Ysabel, we have a prohibition on any cannabis from Santa Ysabel leaving the state of California. In fact, it can only go to a jurisdiction, a dispensary or retail outlet that allows cannabis. So we don't even allow our cannabis to go into local jurisdictions that prohibit cannabis. With regard to the multi-state tribes, Santa Ysabel consults for a number of tribes. Tribes that are along the California-Arizona border. Arizona is a no cannabis state, so our advice is establish your commercial enterprise within the state where it's legal, not within the state where it is not legal, because you're bound to garner the attention of the federal government. Not the state government, but rather the federal government if you're operating in a state where it's prohibited.
What are some of the most progressive states in terms of legislation for tribal communities, and is there anything that we could learn from that in California?
Yeah, Washington and Nevada, and our advice would be do what they did. And Oregon, and Oregon.
If we have all these tribes across the nation, what is the opportunity for them to be unified on, for example, regulations? If the federal government of the United States is going to, I think we all are on the same page here that it's going to happen eventually, if they're going to permit legal cannabis, there's going to be statutes that are uniform. Is there anything that the tribes can do as sovereign nations among themselves to create a a unified platform in regards to regulations, public safety, enforcement, distribution, all the issues that we're facing here in California, and trying to create a legal framework.
So we formed the California Native American Cannabis Association for California, and we also are in the process of creating a Tribal Nations Cannabis Association for tribes across the nation, so that we can all be uniform. We can all help each other, set each other up with policies and ordinances and regulations, and that way we're doing it right. You know, tribes want to just have the legal pathway. We want to do it right. That's why we're compliant with mirroring the state as close as we can, packaging, testing, labeling, all of that. So my vision is that if the federal government makes this legal for tribes, that we can do a nation-to-nation network. You know, maybe I'm growing and there's a tribe across the nation that is in a highly populated area where they don't want to grow, but they can dispense. You know, we all know how easy it is. I put our dispensary up in 2 weeks. I mean, yeah, it wasn't you know, where it needed to be, but it is now. But I did what I call a pop-up dispensary, and we were off and running, and within 2 weeks our revenue was generating. And yeah, we had issues, you know, as far as getting product, and you know, but we did it. And that's where I see this going in the future, is tribes creating that tribal network, nation to nation, trying to, you know, support each other and help each other with the process, so that we're doing it all the right way.
I applaud the efforts of Sunaka on trying to have the tribes work together and be uniform and have model ordinances and such. In Sacramento, tribes agree on very little. They agree on sovereignty. Sovereignty is an overarching principle, but in some of the bills we've worked on, which should not have been controversial, there has been one tribe is sponsoring a water bill, for example, making a specific change. Another tribe is concerned about a precedent that could set, or an infringement on sovereignty, or how it could go be litigated out. So while I applaud the efforts to bring people together, bring tribes together, from what we've seen on the ground, it's a very fractious and not unified in opinions. And so if this can be a way for them to be in alignment, that would be applauded.
What are the implications for reservations that allow cannabis when they have a police department, or the tribal police department, or the tribal police officers who have dual certification, federal and state? And the federal certification complicates their duty to enforce federal law.
Yeah, I was actually one of those federal agents when I worked. So, as I mentioned, we consult, San Ysabel consults for tribes. We have our own police department. They are not federally cross-designated. It's not an issue for us. Our advice to tribes that have dual designated law enforcement officers, that they preclude, prohibit, make sure that those officers do not have anything to do physically with the cannabis enterprise. So there isn't that conflict between enforcement of federal law and the tribe's statutory authority to conduct cannabis business. So our advice is the rest of the reservation, not any patrols or respond to calls for services within that cannabis area.
What happens if one of your transporters gets pulled over by California Highway Patrol?
Been there, done that. Yeah, there again. I'll answer the question, but just by way of instruction of where the state is at, as I mentioned, we have almost 3 years of experience regulating in this space. I've made at least a half a dozen overtures, 2 in person to the chief of the Bureau of Cannabis Control, Lori Ajax, who I knew when she was at ABC. I said, look, you guys are just getting into this regulatory business. Come on down to Santa Ysabel, have a conversation with us. Because I will tell you, these cannabis operators, you guys, are really creative about getting around the rules and finding those loopholes. I'm writing regulation almost every day to plug up those that innovation that you guys exhibit. I have yet to have the state take me up and come down. Although we have held classes, we held a week-long class for cannabis, tribal cannabis regulators. We had a full room. But no one from the state will come down and have a conversation with us about regulating the space, which is kind of interesting. The question was about transportation. So we have a very thorough transportation permitting process. Without boring you, it's about 6-7 pages long. And we have requirements for the driver, requirements for the containers, requirements for the vehicle, verification that the inventory, the shipment reaches its destination. We have had our transportations, and I'm up to 16,000 transportations of cannabis product from Santa Ysabel in the past 3 years. We have been stopped by law enforcement, CHP, local law enforcement. They show the transportation permits. Every single case, the officer said, be on your way. No issues with law enforcement whatsoever in the transportation of product.
All right, so in closing, I'm just going to go down the line here, and if you can just give us just a brief statement about what the ideal policy would look like for Native American cannabis in the state of California. What would facilitate a greater cannabis industry for Indian country and also appease the powers within the state government? What does it look like? What is your wish list for this policy for this next legislative session, were it to be possible? What would you like to see?
I would like to see that legal pathway for tribes to be able to enter into the legal cannabis market. With us tribes, mirroring the state as close as we can, being respectful and of all of the regulations without having to waive our sovereignty, number one. To be able to create our own healthcare system for all Native American people in California, and to be able to bring my tribe up to where we are self-sustaining, where we don't have to rely on the federal government for anything ever, except to have our self-governance body, and to be able to just live in harmony and do what we do, because we are creating a great product, and we're doing it just like all the other tribes want to do. They want to get into this market and be self-sustaining and help their people create programs.
Short and sweet for us, the opportunity to play in a level playing field and consistent application of the rules, whether it's on tribal lands or off tribal lands. If you take a look at CNACA's website, we have our guiding principles and our professional standards. Every one of the 23 tribes of CNACA has committed to those guiding principles and professional standards. Tribes want to do it right. Those that are serious about this business want to do it right. And if we had that mutually respectful relationship with the state of California and with operators off tribal lands, then those few tribes that decide they can make a quick buck because they don't have to create all of the regulatory structure because everything's on the reservation, they'll be outliers, they'll be obvious, and we'll invite them out of this industry.
I echo what both of you said, and I would just like to add that I think it would be really wonderful to see a line of products cultivated and manufactured on California tribal land. We're creating appellations for cannabis grown in different areas in California, and it would be really cool to see California Native Trade Association little brandings, little stamps, and a very yeah, a whole line of products from California tribal land. That would be really amazing.
We're working on it.
Yes.
In dispensaries all across California.
So, I understand the question, Courtney. I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to say, I'm not sure if we talked about really there. Right now, there's language in the regulations that says that businesses on tribal land can apply for a state license. There are really two biggest issues with that. There's a number of issues, but the two biggest issues with that language is twofold. First, there's a waiver of sovereign immunity, as previously referenced, which goes too far, which was done without consultation with tribes, and which is asking for tribes to subsume themselves to cities, to counties, to the state of California, and it's very problematic. And so, and this is speaking individually, completely for myself, it needs to be clear that the business, as opposed to the tribe, whether the business is waiving or choosing not to have a sovereign defense placed as a business compared to the tribe as a whole, and the tribe's regulatory functions and the tribe's land use authority. So there isn't that distinction drawn right now, and that distinction could potentially, again, on my own personal view, potentially alleviate some of the conversations and concerns. I don't know that to be the case, but that's one thing. The second thing is this. Right now, the state recognizes cities and counties as local governments. The language in the regulations essentially say, if you want a license from the state for cannabis on tribal land, you need city or county approval for whatever surrounds that tribe. Those counties do not have zoning approval or land use approval on the tribes, but the state is asking them to regulate and to have that authority, which they do not have. If they tried to do that, they would lose in court because it violates, that violates the sovereignty, the local control, the land use control of the tribes in a ridiculous fashion. So what I'd like to do, what I'm working on trying to do, is explaining to the regulators and those above them, they thought they made a system that works, but it stinks. And it stinks because it doesn't respect tribal land use authority, and it asks for an overly broad waiver of sovereign immunity that doesn't focus on the business aspects itself versus the tribe as a whole.
I'm just going to piggyback off that and say that, absolutely, the tribe should have the ability to retain civil regulatory jurisdiction and regulate cannabis. We have seen with one of the tribes that we're working with, the surrounding county bans cannabis. When we went and spoke with the state, the CDFA actually, about whether or what impact that may have, because from our perspective, the tribe, of course, it doesn't matter that the county surrounding it bans cannabis. They have no jurisdiction on tribal land. We were finally able to get some reasonableness, since well-established law says that counties have no jurisdiction on tribal land. So we are seeing some level of awake and education around this issue. So I hope that you won't have to come up against that, because we've had that fight a little bit.
So let's talk in the next.
Okay.
I've got a meeting next week.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, I will thank our panelists, each and every one of you. I know that you've traveled far and wide and gone to great lengths to be here, so thank you very much. It's been an honor to have you. Thank you. Thank you to Peter, PeterCannabisProject.org,